Good day, everybody. Welcome to Hardwood Home Lab. My name is Kyle, and today I'm going to be showcasing an application that I actually use quite frequently. It's called Calibre Web Automated, and I use it for a central library that organizes and automatically converts my ebook files into the format that I prefer. If you're interested in seeing how this works, then come check it out. So to kick things off, I figured I'd show you the GitHub repository where I found Calibre Web Automated. It's made by the user Crocodile Stick, and I love that name. And it is a fantastic project. If you scroll down, there's a great section here on why this exists. And the short version, not that this is very long, is that Calibre Web was missing a few things that could have been automated to make it more convenient. And this person has decided to make it their own. It's one of the great things about open source projects. It can be forked and improved. And this so far is my favorite project. Now, what I use it for is a central repository basically for all of my ebooks. This way I can access them from any devices, including my e-readers, although I rarely access it that way. I typically just download my books onto my laptop here and then add it onto my e-reader. They've got some great documentation on the goal of the project, some companion apps that they've also created. So it's worth exploring. I'm not going to go through any of that today. What I am going to cover is their install process. And if you look, the quick install is just curling a Docker Compose file onto your system and then running Docker Compose up. Or they recommend using a Docker Compose file, which is decidedly the same thing. So for this install, I'm going to be using Docker Compose and Docker Compose only. So I'll switch over to my terminal, and I'm already SSH'd into my server where I run all of my Docker projects. I'm just going to change directories into where I keep all of my apps. And here I'm going to create a directory called CWA for Calibre Web Automated. You know what? I'm going to keep it all lowercase. And then I'm going to change into that directory. And in here, I'm just going to use vim to create a compose file. Now, before recording, I did copy the Docker Compose file that was in that repository that I was just showing you. And I made a couple of tweaks, and I'm just going to paste that in here. Now, there's only a few things in here that I changed from their example Compose file. One is I changed the time zone to match where I'm at. So I'm in the America Edmonton time zone. And I also changed the network share mode to true. And that's because where I'm going to be storing all my files is actually on an NFS share. So if you're using this on an NFS share or an SMB share, you'll want to change this to true because as per the documentation on the Calibre Web Automated repository, you could end up having issues with your database, and it will also cause issues with the operation of the import folder, which I'm going to show you in a bit. So this is a thing that I needed to change for my setup. If you're not using a network share, you're better off leaving this as false, since it will actually have a better performance. Now, I left the CWA port override just as is. You don't really ever need to change this. If you needed to change the port, you're better off actually changing the left side of this colon to whatever's available on your host machine. So the last thing that I changed in here was actually the volume locations, because in the example one, they had some rather generic locations that didn't actually exist on my system, and I didn't want Docker to create them. So I changed the location to all of these volumes to / with the directory name. And this / is actually going to create these directories within the upper level directory that the Docker Compose file is in. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, I'll show you how that works in just a moment. So with those changes made, I am actually ready to start this. And before I close this file, I actually wanted to point out that they've changed the PUID and PGID, which are just the identification numbers for the user that this container is running as. And I love to see that because that means that the container is not going to have a root user running in it, and that just means this is going to be more secure than a container that would be. So with that, I'm going to write and quit. And now if I show you the contents of this folder, the only thing in here is this compose.yaml file that I just created. I'm going to start this Docker container now by running docker compose up -d. And with that, Calibre Web Automated is now up and running. It took a little over a minute, so I can now access this through a web browser on the IP address of this Docker host on port 8083. I also like to run things behind a reverse proxy, and I'm just going to quickly set that up. Now I want to create a DNS entry for this service. I have a bunch already running on here, but I go to settings, local DNS records, and I have everything running at this reverse proxy. So I'm just going to create, I'll call this one cwa.hardwoodhomelab.demo.xyz. I'm just going to point that back to npm.hardwoodhomelab.demo.xyz. Now the reason I use a CNAME is if I ever change my reverse proxy for whatever reason, then all I have to do is change this one record and all of these will carry on with it. All right, now that I've got a DNS record that's pointing to my reverse proxy, I'm going to have to add the new host in the reverse proxy so that it can point me to the right site. In order to do that, I'm going to click Add Proxy Host. I called that one cwa.hardwoodhomelab.demo.xyz. And that host is 192.168.240.16.162, and I said that's on port 8083, which is the same thing that we saw in the Docker compose file. I'm going to leave that as publicly accessible. I'll just make sure that we've got WebSocket support because that's usually important for most things that I host. We'll go to SSL. I've got a wildcard certificate here, and then I'm going to force SSL. I don't really need all of this, but I'm just going to set it anyway and click save. All right, I've got my DNS set, and now that my reverse proxy knows where to find this host, I'm ready to access it through the browser. I'm just going to go to cwa.hardwoodhomelab.demo.xyz. So this is what it looks like when you first access the web browser. You're not going to have an account yet, so there is a default one, and it is listed on the GitHub website. The default login is admin and then password admin123. So we're going to use that, and now we're in. Now, the very first thing you're going to want to do once you get in here is switch the theme because, oh my god, that is so bright. So now that my eyes no longer feel like they want to bleed from looking at this, I'll show you a few of the settings that I prefer to change. For one, I would change the username and password because admin and admin123 are anything but secure. I'm not going to do that for this demonstration, but it's simple enough. You click add user, or you can click on edit user and then edit. Easy enough. A few things that I do like to change, however, are under the basic configuration. You can look under the database configuration. There's nothing in there I've ever changed. Under the basic configuration, you don't really need to go into the server configuration or the log file configuration. They do have a couple things in here if you do want to have a more secure connection to this website. You can give it an SSL certificate and key file, and you can serve this as an HTTPS connection from right here. But since I'm behind a reverse proxy, it doesn't apply to my install. What I do like to change is under the feature configuration. I like to enable uploads. Now this will allow you to upload books right from the browser. I do want to warn you, if you do upload files from the browser, they will not go through the automation process that Calibre Web Automated has. It is in their path to have that in the future, but as of the time of this recording, you cannot use the automations when you upload a book from the web browser. So if you have books that are already in the format that you want, then this is a great way to add them. It's convenient because you don't have to use your file browser, but it does bypass the automations. So I'm showing you this as something that I have as a convenience, but I don't necessarily recommend using it. A couple of other things that you may want to enable on here is you can enable anonymous browsing. So since this is probably going to be only within your home, if you enable this, you don't have to sign in to look at what books are available. And enable public registration, if you check that one, then you would be able to sign up for an account on this server without having to have the admin create your account for you in advance. I've never used hardcover sync before, but this is something, if you have an API from hardcover, you can use that to grab metadata for your books as well. So under the security settings, the only thing that you really would want to change is maybe if you wanted a weaker password policy, you can change your password policy right here. You can also change the limit failed login attempts. So that would basically allow you to brute force your password if for any reason you forgot it. These are things that I wouldn't necessarily recommend changing, especially if you've got this available to the public internet. But that's all I typically ever change on here. So I'm just going to click save, and you can see the configuration is updated. Now you might also want to change your UI configurations. Now in here, there's just basically things that will change the way the website behaves and looks. So you can change things like the title, books per page. There's a whole bunch of things that you could change. If you want to go through here, I don't typically change it because I kind of like the way it looks. The only thing I would maybe change is the title. So Calibre Book Barn or something silly. And you can see the title changed right there. And it's basically just worth going through here and taking a look at what settings there are. But I think they're fine just the way it is. Also scrolling down in settings, the CWA settings. So these are the automations that make this different from Calibre Web on its own. Now, I've never needed to change anything in here personally because these are actually set the way that I prefer. But there are a few things in here that are likely to be different for other users. For example, if I scroll down here, you can choose what format of books that you prefer to keep on this server. So if you change this to AZW3 or Mobi or PDF, when you import a book into this server, it's going to automatically change the format to your preference. You may also prefer to ignore certain formats. So if you're okay with, say, Mobi files being left as Mobi files, then you can check this box and it will ignore that format and it won't convert it for you. But I like to have that left on. It also has the same thing for when you're ingesting files. And it turns out I lied to you. This last setting here is actually something that I do change. If you get two books that are the same, you have the option for it to either ignore the book, overwrite it, or create a new record so that you would have two entries for it. What I do is I just overwrite the old one. So I'm just going to apply these settings. That's, I think, about all that I ever change in the settings. I'll kind of show you how the book imports work. You can upload books, like I said, from the browser here, and I'm going to do that. I've got my ebooks folder here. Now these are all books that I've actually purchased from Humble Bundle, and these ones are kind of silly cookbook ones. I'll upload those. And now that those books have been ingested, I'm back on the home page, and you can see all the silly cookbooks that I have bought from Humble Bundle. So that's one way to get books into your server. The next way is actually by adding it into the ingest folder for Calibre, and I'll show you that one now. All right, so I'm in my documents directory. I'm just going to go into the ebooks directory here, and I'm going to grab all the rest of my Humble Bundle bundles. I'm just going to copy them, and I'm going to drop them into, where are we at here, CWA. into the in folder. I'm going to paste them all here. So for some reason, inside this directory, my ingest directory was owned by root. So I had to come in here and run sudo chown, and then I put in my username in and ran that command. That changed the ownership to Hardwood Home Lab. I don't know why that one went as root. Everything else is owned by my user. And in here, I'm just going to paste all those books. So as you can see, that's going to take a minute. So I'll be right back when that's done. All right, now that all those files have been dropped into the ingest folder, I'm going to switch back over to the browser. Now, if you remember in the Docker Compose file, I had set network share status to true. That means that this thing's going to scan that ingest folder every 5 seconds, and when it sees anything in there, it's going to start importing it into the web UI. It'll bring it into the library folder, and it will delete the files from the ingest folder. So I'm going to give that a couple minutes for it to ingest those files, and I'll be right back when it's done. Okay, so I left this for probably 10-15 minutes, and it did not ingest those books the way it's supposed to. This is actually the same behavior I see on my personal install. I'm not sure why. It's supposed to pull that ingest folder every 5 seconds and then import them. It's never worked for me on my setup. However, this is a great opportunity to show you what to do in the event that, say, something gets stuck while doing the ingest process. I just refreshed the page just to make sure that nothing wasn't happening in the background. If the files that you've stuck in the ingest folder are not going automatically, which for the record, when I'm not using network storage, it has worked flawlessly every time. Immediately after a book is added in there, it gets ingested. For some reason, it's only with network shares that I've had this issue. But when it does get stuck, you can click refresh library here, and it's going to scan that ingest folder and it will start to import them. So if I scan this, you can see learning TypeScript has already been ingested. Now this is actually going to take a while, so I'm going to let this run and I'll show you the outcome. So things are looking a little bit different now because life happened and I had to stop recording. So it's the next day. The import process of all of these books didn't quite take a day. The import process, I believe, took about an hour because we had a little over 100 books and it went through the automation process of verifying all the data on all of these books. So there was a lot there, but they're now in Calibre Web Automated, and this is where it gets a little more usable. With all of my ebooks imported into the library, it's time to show you one of my favorite features of Calibre Web Automated, and it's not exactly exclusive to Calibre Web Automated. Calibre Web does this, and actually Calibre on its own also does this. But if I take a look at the library, all of the books are organized now by author. So if you read something that you really enjoy, like for example, I really liked Donald Tavoult's books. I think that's how his name is pronounced. When I finished reading Linux Management Made Easy with Systemd, I was thoroughly impressed with his writing style, so I immediately finished up Linux Security and Hardening, the 3rd edition, because I also have the 2nd edition here. So this makes it really easy to find an entire series written by an individual author. I don't have any fiction in here right now, but if I did and there was an entire series on it, I would easily be able to find the whole thing just by finding the author and going through all of the books in a much smaller library. This can also easily be done on the web browser. So if I switch back here, we can actually sort by author as well. But with your file system organized neatly, if your web server does not work for any reason, you can still easily access it and it's all neatly organized. I love this feature. Of course, all the books that I have ingested in here actually were in EPUB format. Now to show you the usefulness of Calibre Web Automated, I've also downloaded a book that is in .mobi format, which is not the type of format that I typically use. Now in order to import that file into Calibre Web Automated and have it go through the automations and the automatic transitioning to an EPUB file, I'm going to have to use the ingest folder. So I've switched over to my file browser and I've got my Mobi file in the downloads directory. So I'm just going to copy this and I pasted it into the ingest directory. Now I'll switch back over to my browser and I'm just going to refresh the library this time without waiting for it to see it. Okay, so this time it only took about a minute to ingest the new book and you can see it's right here. Now if I were to download this file again, it's in EPUB format. It was converted from Mobi to EPUB automatically while it ingested the file. So that's kind of the most useful application for the automated part of Calibre Web Automated for me personally. The other useful features are now I've got a central repository where I can see all of my ebooks. I can read them from here, so I'll just choose Linux Security and Hardening here. This is a wonderful book, by the way. I've already read it, and if you're interested in learning how to secure Linux systems, specifically with SE Linux or AppArmor and firewalls, this is a wonderful resource. Now, after saying how good this book is, if I want to read it, I would click this book icon over in the top right. And to save my eyes, I will change this to dark mode. And you can just scroll through your pages here and read it right from your web browser. In here, if you've read for a while, it actually saves your progress. So you can just close the window, and if I open it again, it brings me right back to the same spot. We've also got the option of leaving a bookmark, but you can only leave one. So if I say want to come back to this particular spot, I can click on that and scroll through. And you can see there's a bookmark tab here where you can go right back to where you were. We've also got a nice table of contents on the left side. So if you wanted to jump around to different spots, you can easily just click to them. These arrows also give you subcategories within, so you can just bounce around. I do sometimes use the web browser to actually read the books that I've acquired, but for me personally, what I use this for is a remote repository for all of my books. And when I want to install the book onto my e-reader, I just download it from here, connect my e-reader via USB cable, and drop it on. Of course, the search features on here are also really good. So if I wanted to look for a book about Python, since I have a few, I can just type it in there, or we can do advanced searches as well, searching by book title, author, publisher. I just kind of want to give a shout out here to Humble Bundle at this point, because all of the books that you see here, all of these tech books came from Humble Bundle, and if you watch their deals, I pulled up their website here so you can see, there are typically a lot of IT and technical books available. From Humble Bundle, everything that I've seen so far, the value has been really good. And the books that you buy from here also come DRM free, so you can use them on any device. I highly recommend it just because I personally use it. Just to be clear, this is not a sponsored endorsement. This is a personal endorsement. So that's Calibre Web Automated and the features that I personally use. This is by no means an exhaustive tutorial on how to use Calibre Web Automated. So there are more features available. For example, if you use Calibre right now and you have plugins that you use, you can use that with this program as well. But that's all I've got to show you with this application today. I appreciate you joining me. My name is Kyle. This is Hardwood Home Lab, and I'll see you in the next one.